Words collide, truth unfolds, different voices, stories told, no disguise, we speak it raw.
Today we need to talk about something that I've wrestled with for years. The problem with how we tell African stories. Here's the truth. Too many stories about Africa are still told through a single lens. A lens of suffering, a lens of crisis, a lens that flattens millions of lives into one narrative. The narrative of the struggling African, where you hear of starving children, war-torn villages, corrupt politicians, natural disasters. But that's not the Africa that I know. I have traveled the length and breadth of Africa and I've seen resilience in places the world has written off. I've met innovators in refugee camps. I've met mothers building businesses with little or no support. I've met young people shaping their future in forgotten border towns. And yet, when donors or global media want a story, it's often the child with flies on their face that they look out for. That's not storytelling. That's strategy disguised as sympathy. Let's be honest. When most people outside this continent think of African stories, what comes to mind? That's the dominant narrative, and it's one that global development institutions and Western media have pushed for decades. The kind of stories that often get funding, the ones that magnify suffering. The more miserable the character, the more impactful the story appears. And here's the thing, that suffering is real, we all know. But the problem is when it becomes the only thing that people see, then that's a problem. It becomes what I call pity-driven storytelling, or what people call poverty porn. And what makes it dangerous is that it doesn't just shape perception, it shapes policy, it shapes funding and power dynamics. So let me share with you a personal experience. I remember filming in a remote community in Kenya with dusty roads, no running water, very limited access to schools. A donor agency had asked if we could focus the story on how desperate the community was. Of course, I understand their points. They needed funding, right? But when I got there, I met a group of young women teaching each other literacy using sticks and sand. They had created their own informal classroom under a tree. It was raw, it was beautiful, it was empowering. I could have filmed only the broken walls and hungry faces. But instead, we told a story about resourcefulness, about sisterhood, about quiet power, about community, about resilience. And you know what happened? The story still moved people. But not through pity. It moved people through respect and through recognition. So why does this matter? You see, when we tell stories that strip away the dignity of people, the agency of people, we don't just misrepresent them, we actively disempower them. It becomes harder for a donor to see a young girl as a leader when all they've seen are images of her looking helpless. It becomes harder for policymakers to respect African voices when the only stories they've consumed are filled with crisis. And it becomes harder for us as Africans to fully believe in our own potential when we are constantly bombarded with stories that suggest that we are broken. So what do we need to do? We need stories with nuance. Stories that hold joy and struggle in the same breath. We need stories told with people, not just about them. Stories that don't just show what's wrong, but what's working. Stories that show what's possible, what's beautiful. We need to move from pity to partnership, from savior-driven stories to stories of shared strength, and most importantly, we need more stories told by us, Africans. Because really, no one can tell our truth with the same care that we can. So this is my challenge to you, every creator out there, NGO, journalist, or development communicator. Don't just tell stories that make people feel sorry. Tell stories to make people see clearly. Dignity is not something to add in post-production. It should be the foundation of your storytelling process. The world doesn't need another fly on the face narrative. The world needs stories that honor humanity, even in hard places. Let's tell those stories. This is a dialogue with Ibitoye, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is the dialogue, no holding back. We talk.